The story of the Transfiguration appears in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It is clearly important, and yet it is something for which we have absolutely no explanation. We can picture Jesus teaching on the hillsides, can't we? We can picture him confronting the Pharisees in the synagogues. And even when miraculous events are taking place, like healings, they're sort of grounded. I mean, Jesus is there, there's grass, there's trees, there's rocks, there's people. It's something we can relate to. But this is different. Going up on the mountain to pray with Peter, James, and John might start out ordinary, but we very quickly find ourselves in uncharted waters. What is being described is not even remotely in the range of normal. Spiritually speaking, to have a mountaintop experience, we have to do more than climb a mountain. Climbing a mountain is hard work, but we have to do more than that. But the symbolism is all there. If you've ever climbed a mountain, you know that you can see for miles. You get a new perspective on things. Things that look big, look small. You see the overall whole picture. But Jesus did more than climb a mountain with his disciples. He went up the mountain to pray. Every major decision that he made, he prayed first. When we read this story, the parallels with Moses' encounter are very compelling. The glory of the Lord transformed appearance. Both times, God spoke from out of a cloud. Both events inspire fear and awe. And of course, common to both is Moses himself, although admittedly, the first time he was alive, so it was a bit more of a natural experience. The presence of Moses, however, is significant. He led the people of Israel out of slavery. He was the giver of God's revealed will in the Ten Commandments. And Moses also prophesied that the Lord would raise up another prophet like him to lead the people. He said, "The Lord your God will raise up a prophet like me from among you, from your fellow Israelites. You must listen to him." Elijah also was associated with the Messiah. He was expected to appear first to announce the day of the Lord. The prophet Malachi wrote, "See, I will send the prophet Elijah to come before that great and dreadful day that the Lord comes." According to Luke, it was as Jesus was praying that his face changed and his clothes became blindingly bright. The disciples must have thought they were hallucinating if they understood what hallucinating was. We know that Peter and James and John had been fighting sleep up to that point, so it's possible that Jesus had been praying for a long time. Then two men, Moses and Elijah, appeared alongside of him in glorious splendor, talking with him. At that, Peter, James, and John were wide awake. I think I would have been wide awake at that point, no matter how tired I had been 5 minutes earlier. Only Luke's gospel recalls what they were talking about. They were talking about Jesus' departure from Jerusalem. The word is exodon, which is, yes, the same word as Exodus. Jesus was getting some advice, some moral support, some comfort from two of God's most faithful servants on how to face his own time of trial. We have no idea how long this conversation lasted, but clearly the whole atmosphere was unreal. Peter even managed to say, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for Moses and one for Elijah and one for you." But Luke's gospel says he had no idea what he was saying. It was while Peter was speaking this nonsense that a cloud appeared and covered them. Now they knew they were really in trouble. They knew their Bibles. They knew the stories. If a cloud came down in a circumstance like that, they were about to enter the presence of God. How can you enter the presence of God and live? Out of the cloud, God spoke, saying, "This is my Son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." And then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. Moses and Elijah were gone. Everything was back to normal. The 3 stood alone with Jesus. We are told that the disciples kept to themselves what had happened at the time. They were probably so overwhelmed that they did not know what mental category to put it in. And later that day, what happened to them is the kind of thing that happens to us. They came down from the mountainside, from an experience of God, right back into the muckiness of daily life. A crowd making demands, a healing that the disciples left behind had not been able to carry out, and all of the noise and the bustle and the demands of life. Now, if this encounter were purely so that Jesus could have had a conversation with Moses and Elijah, then there is no reason for the disciples to have been there. Jesus would have gone alone. But he deliberately invited them to come. He wanted them to see. He wanted them to hear. These 3 were given a supernatural experience of God breaking into our world. And there is only one reason for that. And that is they were going to need the memory of this experience in the days, months, and years ahead. Their faith was going to be tested. Jesus gave them something that they could look back on and hold on to when life got very scary and very tough. Now, Moses was the great lawgiver, and Elijah the great prophet. For Peter, James, and John to see them was to see God's plan come to fruition. To literally hear the voice of God saying, "This is my Son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." That should remove any doubt whatsoever. And yet, don't we all know what happened to Peter? Whether it was doubt or fear, he blew it. He denied Christ 3 times, even after this. This may give those of us with far lesser spiritual experiences some hope and confidence in God's mercy. When we talk about mountaintop experiences, don't we picture something glowing and happy and peaceful? You know, that person having a moment of pure tranquility in this mountaintop experience. But this was not that. And in point of fact, God's presence doesn't always bring that kind of peace and tranquility. And the subject matter here wasn't peaceful either. It was about Jesus' death and a resurrection that they couldn't begin to comprehend. In my experience, when I have felt the presence of God so tangibly that I can remember it to this day, were not highs. The first was when I was walking down the street and I felt him walking right next to me. I was not yet a Christian. And here he was saying, and I'm like, I don't believe in you. And he's like, uh-huh. And we had an argument. Because you see, the kind of Christianity that I'd been brought up with was women stay home and be submissive and bake cookies. And gay people are evil and bad. And all kinds of things that I had a lot of problems with. So I said to the Lord, I'm gay. And he said, I don't have a problem with that. I made you that way. And I went, okay.
Amen.
And then he proceeded to tell me that I was called to the ministry. I said, I'm 19, I don't even go to church. He said, don't worry. It'll happen. Then I had to start going to church. I had to give up and say, okay, you win. I lost this round. I'll believe in you. And that was the beginning. Now, did I hear this voice audibly? No. But it was profound. Did well-intentioned conservative Christians get in the way of me following this call and accepting myself? Absolutely. We all know that I got married to somebody else who was trying the same thing. Poor Doug and I were desperately trying to be straight. We produced 3 children in the process. It didn't make us straight. God's purpose worked in, through, and around everything that happened. My second, even more profound experience of God, however, was after my divorce, during a period of great suffering, of profound grief and depression, a low that I never want to go back to as long as I live. That time there were no words. He simply sat by my bedside all night, and I knew he was there. And by the morning, his presence had given me the will to live and to fight on. I can't explain either one of these events. Neither can be proven. Both are subject to the ridicule and scorn of atheists. But the proof, as it were, is there in the fruit. I'm a pastor. I'm now happily married to my wife. And having come through a time of great darkness, I'm alive. The message Peter, James, and John received from God is this: this is my son whom I have chosen. Listen to him. It's not always easy to listen to Jesus. He calls us to a new way of life. Sometimes he calls us to do things we can't imagine ourselves doing. And things that everyone around us says that we can't do. Women are told, you're wrong. You can't lead. You couldn't possibly have heard God's call right. LGBTQ people are told, you're wrong. You're sinners. God rejects this. But throughout the clamor of all of these voices, Jesus is still there. His voice is still there. And when our culture tells us to seek wealth and financial security, and God tells us to seek the kingdom of God, we can choose to listen to that voice and not the voice of the world that says money will bring us happiness. When our leaders strut about in pride and brag, and God tells us that humility is the way to be, we can can choose to listen to God's voice, not that which is elevated around us. And when our gut screams at us to hit back and hurt the one who hurt us, Jesus tells us to rise above, to demonstrate our equality and our grace and our authority by turning the other cheek and not giving them the power to make us inferior. We have a choice to listen to Jesus' voice. We have nothing to prove. Most of the time in our day-to-day lives, we don't experience God in this way. We probably wouldn't survive it if we experienced God this intensely. But we get what we need when we need it. Peter, James, and John needed to see and hear the truth about Jesus so that when they went through the trauma of the crucifixion, they would be able to come out the other side and proclaim the hope of the resurrection. They would be able to start this great movement called Christianity. Whatever our call in life is, whatever stage in life we are at in our journey, God is with us, and God will reveal God's self to us in exactly the way we need. Amen.